Hello everyone, welcome back to Talking History. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name's Liz and on this channel I do exactly as it's called. I talk all about history. So before we start, no, you are not seeing things. Yes, I am wearing glasses. I am a glass wearer. I don't usually wear them when I'm filming, but I needed them today because my eyes were hurting me a bit, so I thought it'd be better to wear them. And I'm looking very pasty and pale because it's extremely hot. I can't be bothered wearing makeup, so you're seeing me in all natural. Here we are. But I hope you're all keeping okay during this heat wave. I think it's about 35-36 degrees as I'm filming this today, so I want to get it done before it gets really hot. And I hope that you're not walking your dogs if you're a dog walker. The amount of people I've seen walking their dogs in this heat is unreal. It's just so silly. Walk them nice and early. I don't have dogs, I have 2 cats. But I would love to have dogs, but my husband has allergies. So. But walk them nice and early, you know. Don't walk them at 12, 1 o'clock when it's boiling hot. How would you like if you was wearing a thick coat and you had nothing on your feet? You do that, see how you like it. Anyway, that's my ramble. I don't like it. I don't like seeing animals suffering. So there we go. And that's my rant. I'm over that. Okay, done. Let's move on. Today's video, we are near, very near the end of the Anglo-Saxon period. Dare I say I am talking about the last Anglo-Saxon king, or should we call him the last House of Wessex Anglo-Saxon king? Today's video is all about Edward the Confessor. I am not going to go into too much detail about Harold Godwinson or William the Conqueror or the Battle of Hastings, because they all have their own video coming. I want this to be all about Edward. Obviously I will be mentioning them because they're all big players during this time, but I want this video to be all about Edward. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Edward the Confessor was the last Anglo-Saxon king from the House of Wessex. He was the 4th time great-grandson of Alfred the Great. And it's believed that Edward was born in Islip, I think, in Oxfordshire, and he was born around 1003 or 1005. And he was the first child born to King Ethelred II, also known as Ethelred the Unready, and to his second wife, Emma of Normandy. And Edward's first few years were marred by the ever escalating Viking raids that were targeting England at the time. And when Edward was around 10 in 1013, Sweyn Forkbeard, the Danish king, had invaded England and had overawed the throne. So this resulted in Emma of Normandy and her young family, which was Edward, Alfred and their sister Godgifu, to flee to Normandy for safety, which was now under the rule of Emma's brother Richard II. And in February 1014, Sweyn Forkbeard died suddenly, and the Witan had recalled King Ethelred back to the throne, but things hadn't gotten any better. And Sweyn's son, Canute the Great, was on his way back to England to claim the throne that he believed was rightfully his. And King Ethelred died in April 1016, and the throne went to Ethelred's only remaining son from his first wife Ælfgifu. They had 9 children together in total, including 6 sons, but unfortunately all over the years they all died, and this remaining Ethelred's only remaining heir, which was Edmund Ironside. Edmund Ironside went up against the Danish army and their leader, Canute the Great, and unfortunately Canute lost his fight against Canute. Edmund lost his fight against Canute, and he died in November 1016, possibly from the wounds he received in battle, and Canute was now proclaimed King of England. Edward and his siblings, who were still in Normandy at the time, were now in exile, and a year later in 1017 Emma of Normandy married Canute, possibly in an effort to secure her son's safety. Edward, who had lived most of his formative years in Normandy, had lived there for 24 years under the protection of the Dukes of Normandy. And Edward had lived a lifestyle of nobility. He had even signed charters as King of England. And Edward had vowed from a young age that he would return to England to take his rightful place as king. After all, Edward had royal blood. Edward had received support from various people, including his cousin Robert I, Duke of Normandy. And in 1034, Edward had attempted to invade England. Edward by now was in his early 30s. He attempted to invade England to have himself placed as king. And along the way, Edward had received even more supporters, including figures from the church. And it's believed it's around this time that Edward had turned to religion, and he developed a conviction and a piety that would stay with him from the rest of his life. Just a little side note, they didn't actually land in England when they attempted to invade England. They ended up in Jersey. I'm not quite sure how. I mean, I know it's along the way, I think. I'm not great at geography, I do history, so. But I mean, it's possibly the weather may have played a part in it, but they never landed in England at that time. So despite Edward receiving the support from pretty good, powerful figures, his chances of actually assuming the English throne were beginning to go further away. Edward's mother, Emma of Normandy, had greatly favoured her youngest son by King Canute, Arthur Canute. And Emma's ambition for Arthur Canute had usurped Edward's chances of being king. But for how long? King Canute died in 1035, and Canute had left both Denmark and England to his youngest son, Arthur Canute. Arthur Canute, who was now king of Denmark, he was preoccupied with defence in Denmark, and this had resulted in the English throne being unoccupied, which resulted in Harold Harefoot being able to step in and claim the throne as regent. Emma of Normandy held on to Wessex for Arthur Canute. A year later, Edward and his younger brother Alfred received an invitation from their mother to return to England. And unfortunately, as soon as they arrived, Alfred was captured by Godwin, the Earl of Wessex, and he was handed over to Harold Harefoot. Harold had Alfred brutally blinded by hot pokers, and unfortunately Alfred died from his injuries. Harold had Alfred blinded to take him out of the succession, as a blind king would not be able to lead his men. Anyone seen The Last Kingdom? Which season are we on? Are we on season 3? I think I'm on season 3 at the moment. I'm catching up. But they had, Alfred had Ethelwald, there's the scene where he had him out in front of the in the street. He had them blinded by a hot poker. So that's the reason he took him out of the running of the succession, because he won't be able to lead his men. Anyway. So Edward had managed to return to Normandy before he had suffered the same fate. And in the next couple of years, Emma too also found herself expelled by Harold. She fled to Bruges in Belgium for safety. And she remained there until Harold died in 1040, when Harthacnut was now able to take his place as king, and with Emma by his side. Harthacnut had invited his half-brother Edward back to England, and he had him named as the next in line for the throne. And Harthacnut died in 1042. Edward was now proclaimed King of England. But Edward wouldn't have his coronation until the following year in 1043. He had his coronation on the 3rd of April, on Easter Day. And Edward had never fully recovered from the turbulent relationship he had with his mother, Emma of Normandy, who had openly shown her favouritism towards Harthacnut. So Edward, in a personal vengeance, had Emma's properties stripped away from her, and Emma died almost in complete obscurity in 1052. There's no record to say if Edward had ever done anything to recognise his brother's murder, unlike his father Ethelred had done for his older half-brother Edward the Martyr when he was murdered. Even though Edward was the rightful heir to the English throne, he was pretty much a stranger in his own kingdom. After all, he had spent 24 years in Normandy, and Edward had no power base of his own, so he needed support. And he received that support from 3 of the greatest earls. And those earls were Leofric, Siward, and Godwin. Godwin being the most powerful of the 3. And Edward sealed the deal with Godwin. He married Godwin's daughter Edith in January 1045. Edward was in his early 40s at this point. Edith was in her at least late teens or very early 20s. Edward had looked to his uncle Richard II as a role model, as Richard had ruled Normandy in peace, and Edward had a coin issued with peace stamped on it, and he also created a permanent base at Westminster. And Edward also wanted to bring his own men in. He wanted to remain loyal to his Normandy heritage. So in 1050, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Edson, had died. Godwin had pushed for Alaric to become the next Archbishop of Canterbury. However, Edward had gave the position to Robert of Shumiege. And it's recorded in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles that Robert of Shumiege had a hold over Edward. And Robert of Shumiege was created Archbishop of Canterbury in 1051. And to witness the occasion and to visit England was Edward's second cousin William of Normandy. And it's believed that it's here that Edward had named William, the Duke of Normandy, his heir. Tensions were now rising between Godwin and Edward. Edward had never fully trusted Godwin. He had a disliking towards the man, and things weren't looking so good in the Godwin family either. Godwin's eldest son, Sweyn, Sweyn, who was the Earl of South West Midlands, and he had been exiled to Denmark after he had kidnapped the Abbess of Leominster, and it had resulted in Sweyn murdering his cousin and fleeing. And I will discuss more about this when I do the video on Harold Godwinson, so I will delve deeper into the Godwin's family for you. Edward had now seen the opportunity to expel the Godwins. So the Godwin's family were sent into exile, including Edward's own wife Edith, who he sent to a nunnery. However, the Godwins didn't stay away for long. They returned a year later with the support of the Earls of the Kingdoms. So when they returned, a few of Edward's men were pushed out, in particular Robert of Shumiege. And Robert of Shumiege had brutally murdered a man on his way out. I think it's quite safe to say that he was not a pleasant man. Godwin had died in 1053 in the presence of the king. He had died from a stroke. And he left his legacy to Harold, who was now Harold Godwin's son. And Harold was now finally able to show what he was made of. Harold had dealt with the rebellion in the north of England and Wales. And Edith, who was now back with Edward, and the lack of an heir was becoming a real issue. It had been told that Edward had chose a life of celibacy, but it's believed that this was made up by his monk followers. Edward was in fact an active and a dynamic man, and there's little doubt that he had intended for his marriage to produce an heir. Edith was younger than Edward, and at the time, if no heirs were produced, whose fault was it? The woman's. It was the woman's fault. Oh, it's Edith's fault. Well, there's no heirs. It's all her fault. But it was just simply bad luck. And it's now believed at this time that Edward's and Edith's relationship had turned more into a relationship of a father and daughter. In 1054, Edward had sent both Harold Godwinson and the Bishop of Worcester to the continent to search for his nephew, the son of his older half-brother Edmund Ironside. This son was Edward the Exile. To not confuse things, I will call Edward the Exile, and Edward the Confessor, I'll call him King Edward, because there's just too many Edwards and it'll get confusing. So, eventually in 1057, Edward the Exile was found and he returned to England. And he arrived with his wife and his 3 children, and in the hope that Edward the Exile would be designated as King Edward's heir, even though this didn't mean that he would be the intended successor. But unfortunately, Edward the Exile had died just within a couple of days of arriving in England, even before he had chance to meet his uncle, King Edward. Edward the Exile's wife and children were welcomed into the royal court. History, it's been kind to Edward. Edward, who was tall and dignified and kind with rosy cheeks and a long white beard, but Edward is unfortunately more well known for leaving the English throne in turmoil after his death, and this resulted in England changing forever. In the last years of Edward's reign, he chose to distance himself from the politics and to engage in more gentlemanly pursuits after attending church every morning. Edward was also known for having a new church built in Westminster, the new abbey in the Norman style, replacing the old Saxon church at Westminster. This would later be demolished by, Henry III and have a new Gothic style one that stands today in recognition of Edward. There's still pieces of Edward's design that remains. The round arches and the supporting columns of the Undercroft Arch can still be seen today. The grand opening of the abbey was held on the 28th of December in 1065. Unfortunately, Edward was too ill to attend. Edward had actually fallen ill on the 28th of December and is believed to be from a stroke. And Edward died on the 5th of January in 1066. He was aged around 63 and he had reigned for about 24 years. In the Bayeux tapestry, there's the one bit where Edward is in his deathbed, Harold Godwinson is kneeling beside him, and Edward is reaching out, touching his shoulder. Was this Edward's way of naming Harold as his successor? No one knows for definite, and this has caused many historians many headaches over the years, and it's still one of those things with a big question mark. No one knows. Now, Edgar the Atheling, who was Edward the Exile's eldest son, Edgar the Atheling was a direct heir. He had royal blood in him. He was the great grandson of King Ethelred II. But unfortunately, he was considered too young. He was only around 14 or 15, possibly even younger. He was too young to go up against William, Duke of Normandy. Harold Godwinson was soon stepped in, and he was created King of England, becoming Harold II. He reigned for only 10 months. He lost his fight to Duke William of Normandy, and that is all I am going to say on that, because they're all going to have their own videos to come. Edward the Confessor wasn't known as the Confessor during his lifetime. Edward would have been officially canonised as a saint and confessor by Pope Alexander III in February 1161. A confessor is a particular type of saint, and it applies to those who have suffered for their faith, but who are not martyrs, and like his uncle Edward the martyr. Unfortunately, a lot of Edward's relics, including in his portrait, he's holding a red ring. Unfortunately, a lot of those things have disappeared. They disappeared during the dissolution of the monasteries, thanks to good old Henry VIII. We've got to love him, haven't we? Edward's wife Edith, she died after a long illness in her 50s at Winchester on the 18th of December in 1675, and she would be buried alongside her husband Edward the Confessor. And that's Edward. What's your thoughts on Edward? I don't know what to make of him. I don't know, even though we know so much. Well, we don't know an awful lot, but we know enough about Battle of Hastings. As soon as anyone says 1066, they automatically go, oh, Battle of Hastings. So that year is kind of drummed into everyone's head. That's the first thing you learn. I can remember that's one of the first things I learned at history at school, was 1066. That's the only thing but we was never taught enough. We was only taught the fact that, you know, Duke William of Normandy came over, fought Howard Godwinson. Howard Godwinson was killed with an arrow in the eye, and oh, there you go. He's now created William the Conqueror. But we was never taught enough about Edward the Confessor, and there's still not much known about him. I don't think there's enough. But unfortunately, it's just everything goes, doesn't it? At that time, when you think, wouldn't it have been nice if you could just find some things that shows what they are, but a lot of things were destroyed and they didn't seem important at the time. And there we are. Write down your comments, leave comments down below, see what you think and what's your thoughts on Edward. Thank you so much for watching. Look after yourselves, keep yourselves hydrated in this heat, and don't forget to like, subscribe and share so we can build this teeny tiny channel and reach more history lovers like yourselves. Look after yourselves. See you all soon. Bye.